say that I have sort of I'm a fan of Howardena Pindell, so I'm so thrilled that she could make it today. She has been an icon to me throughout this art journey of mine, so again, very thrilled she could be here. I'm also thrilled to welcome artists that I call friends, Firelei Báez and Shah Garg. Thank you so much for coming. I got introduced to Glenn by the way of our book, and both Mark Godfrey and Katie Siegel, the co-editors of our book, said, we need to talk about craft, we need to talk about textiles, and we need to have Glenn Adamson be the writer. And I am so thrilled that Glenn said yes to moderating this panel today. I don't know if you've seen the images of our exhibition, but there was a 30-foot weaving right in this hallway in the middle by an artist, Francois Grossen. And that has become sort of this poster artwork of the show somehow. And it was a work that I saw in Glenn's curation of a show at the Museum of Art and Design that he was the director of. So I'm so thrilled he's here with us. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Cecilia to talk a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you, Kamal. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Cecilia Lemani, and I had the honor of curating this exhibition here in New York. And I'm very excited to welcome you for the second event of Making Their Mark. There will be more, so stay tuned. I'm very excited also to welcome our esteemed speakers and artists tonight. I will be introducing Glenn, the moderator, and Glenn will be introducing our artists, although they don't need any introductions. And the talk will last approximately 45 minutes, then there will be a little time for Q&A, and then some nice refreshments upstairs and downstairs. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator. Glenn Adamson is a curator, writer, and historian based in New York and London. He's previously been director of the Museum of Art and Design and head of research at the V&A. Glenn has also contributed to the amazing catalog that Kamal was mentioning with an inspiring essay titled Craft in the Abstract. Dr. Adamson's publications include Thinking Through Craft, The Craft Leader, Postmodernism, Style and Subversion, The Invention of Craft, Art in the Making, Fewer Better Things, The Hidden Wisdom of Objects, Objects USA 2020, and Craft, An American History. His next book, A Century of Tomorrows, will be published by Bloomsbury 2024. His current curatorial projects includes an upcoming show of Toshiko Takaezo, who's also featured in the exhibition just behind the speakers over there, with the title Words Within, The Art of Toshiko Takaezo, upcoming at the Locution Museum here in New York next year, and then touring in many other venues. So welcome all the speakers, and I'll pass it on to Glenn. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kamal and Cecilia. It's wonderful to see you all here tonight. Such a great turnout. Thanks so much for coming. I have the great honor of moderating this panel, and on the very slight chance that there are people on this stage that you don't know about, I am going to introduce them. Beginning on my left, you're right with Firelei Báez, who received an MFA from Hunter and a BFA from Cooper Union, and is having a great deal of interest in her work over the past few years, and in fact will be the subject of her first major US survey at the ICA Boston, curated by Ava Respini. Congratulations on that. And her work, of course, was included in Cecilia's Venice Biennale exhibition, Book of Dreams, which I hope many of you were able to see in person. Tschabalala Self was educated at Yale University, MFA in painting and printmaking, and has also had many solo exhibitions, including at the Kunstmuseum St. Gallen, Performa 2021, Baltimore Museum of Art, also ICA Boston, and the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. She describes her work as concerned with the emotional, physical, and psychological impact of the Black female body as icon, and and is primarily devoted to examining the intersectionality of race, gender, and sexuality. Great to see you here. And last but by no means whatsoever least, we have Howardena Pindell in the house. Howardena, so wonderful to have you with us today. As I'm sure you all know, Howardena is a formative figure in American art history. She was a founder of AIR Gallery, arguably the most important platform for feminism in the 1970s, certainly here in New York City. Also very involved with the Black Arts Movement at that time. She was also, I believe I'm right in saying, the first African-American curator of the Museum of Modern Art, and was there for about 12 years. Towards the end of that time, she made a video work called Free White and 21, which is indelible and incandescently significant. And if you haven't seen it, when you get home, watch it. It actually is viewable online, and it's not something you will forget. And really has, that single work opened up a great deal of space for artists who have followed. But of course, she's done much, much more, including the wonderful paintings of the type that you can see downstairs with the accretion of color and texture, and particularly these famous bits of paper that she's very well known for. Many of you will have seen her recent exhibition, Rope, Fire, Water at the Shed in 2020. I'm going to kick us off just with a quotation from an essay by Amber J. Phillips, which was written for Gagosian a little while ago. And Amber Phillips beat us to it by pairing Tschabalala Self and Firelei Báez in one piece of writing. And I just wanted to quote one line that she had in that essay, which is as follows: "We aren't just holding up a mirror to ourselves and our communities, we are building the mirror. We are teaching people how to see us and make space for what they see," which I think could be said about many of the works, if not all the works in this incredible exhibition we're sitting inside of. So to my questions for our illustrious panel, and we'll start with Howardena with each question, because she's prepared some notes to address each theme. So the first question is about public and private, and the question really is about how much of the work is for the public and how much of it is about private experience. As it happens, Cecilia just recorded a wonderful podcast with Helen Molesworth, the great curator, from David's Werner Gallery, and they talked about Simone Lee's iconic work, Brick House, which of course on the High Line, and then went to the Venice Biennale, to the Arsenale, and they were talking about the fact that when that sculpture moved from one context to another, went from outdoors to indoors, it changed utterly, and went, in their words, from something that was monumental to something that felt like a talisman, a kind of intimate, mythic, and somewhat personal object. And I'm wondering, Howardena, if you could start us off by talking about the public intention of your work and how much of it is fueled by the private experience of making it a studio as a private space connected to the public space of display.
Okay, well, I'm 80. I apologize to everyone. I always have the right answers because I can't remember things, and I can't read my writing. Anyway, for years I worked alone. For 18 years in lofts, including West Beth, a loft in Soho, and in the Fur District, Fur and Flower District. And eventually I moved to an apartment near the Question Museum, where I was able to do large pieces, which is amazing. Thanks to my dealer, he's not here this evening because there is a hospice for a member of the family. Garth Brennan, the director of his gallery, plus Hugh O'Rourke. They got for me a large loft space in the Bronx, where a number of artists. It's an interesting building. They're both artists and craftspeople. At any rate, let's see, I'll read the notes again. I have more than enough help to help me. Now, obviously, I can't do what I used to do. Like that painting that you see here, I did without any help. When I could lift it, I could now. Anyway, at 80 and handicapped, the large works require visual help. I have wonderful assistants. Gone is the day of being in my loft on 7th Avenue across from FIT and being only one of 3 people living in the block. Hearing burglar alarms going off all night as the people try to rob the furriers. In spite of it, I was very productive. My issue-related work, like Columbus, Hunger, Scapegoat, Little Girls, and those who saw the show would have seen some of these. I wanted to create a dialogue of reflection, and in some cases create a wish to have lifelong learning as a goal. That's something I deal with as a person of 80 years of age. I love books. Anyway, I needed to know and to share more, to discuss and reflect. Years also ago, privacy was essential. One of the issues was I saw some artists taking advantage of other artists. Like, you can work in private, but then this was something that happened at Westbeth. Well, where there were two artists. One had a very wealthy artist boyfriend, and the other didn't. And they communicated, they lived in the same building. And the other artist with the wealthy, well-known boyfriend got a show and showed the other artist's work. In other words, she had studied it, and then that's what she produced as her own. So that to me was a warning. So I was cautious about who I let into the studio. I'd rather have people see the work in an exhibition than have them come in and kind of take from me. I also did have an artist, someone more mature, copied it, and I kind of just, I pulled away. But it was well, anyway, you know the difference when that happens. Excuse me. Let's see. Sorry, let me get some more. Another experience I had, and that was in private, but I wish I'd been in a more public, I'd been around other people. When I had a show air, a collector started calling me up, and I knew he didn't know it was black. Talking about his family, and blah, 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 blah. And he wanted to come and visit the studio and settle down. So we set a time and a date, we wanted to bring friends, and our door, the front door had a glass window in it. And you could see me coming down the stairs. And he saw me, and his whole face went like that. With grim regret, he followed me up the stairs. I was on the third floor. He walked around the space. He looked at any of the art. He demanded a glass of water, which I provided him. And then he said to me and his friends, "I've made a terrible mistake." I'm serious. Now, if I had been around other artists, if I hadn't been in such isolation, I could reach out and say, this happened to me, I feel terrible. Anyway, so privacy, yes, but I'm very happy now to be in a workspace where I have a team and I can work with other people. If someone pulls that, I have witnesses. Okay, that's my answer.
So that idea of being witnessed, I think, is something that will come up a lot in our conversation. Thank you very much, Howardena, for kicking us off. Tschabalala, would you like to comment on that or your own experience in public and private in your work?
I'm not sure. Is this working? Okay, right. I would definitely agree that one of the benefits of having a more public practice is that there is this protection that comes along with it. Obviously, there's a great deal of vulnerability to have yourself be in the public or to have your work be viewed in the public, but I think that the trade-off for that is that there is a level of protection to be in community with other artists and also to be in community with the viewers, to have an audience. Because the audience can become a witness as well for your work, your development as an artist, and also kind of like what your stakes are, like what you stand for, what your practice is seeking to communicate. And me personally, my work is informed primarily by a lot of my own personal experiences and personal thoughts, but it is always, all the works are always made for an imagined public. So I'm kind of always have this duality in my mind when making a work. So trying to make a work that can earnestly speak to my own unique experience, but at the same time, a work that I anticipated sharing with others.
Can I ask, Tschabalala, do you find that word vulnerability that you used, I feel like is very important, and we often I think, allow ourselves to forget how vulnerable it is to be an artist and to be figuring things out in public, often making work that's deeply personal and then showing it to anybody who comes. Do you feel like it's important to you that some quality of that vulnerability stays in the work? How do you think about that as an aesthetic quality?
Well, I don't know how that would be communicated aesthetically across the board. Like everyone communicates that differently. Like for some artists, maybe working on a large scale is actually quite vulnerable, whereas someone might look at that and ostensibly might seem aggressive or to lean into this idea of like machismo or something, but in reality maybe that's actually a vulnerable act. So it really depends on the artist and everyone, and for each artist, the aesthetic tropes in their work have different meanings based on whatever their own personal goals are, or who they are as an individual. But I do think in terms of, you can kind of read vulnerability within kind of the conceptual concerns within someone's practice, and generally that relates to, I think, like an honesty. So someone that's speaking to specific concerns as opposed to kind of these overarching social constructs. I think that's a kind of a vulnerable gesture. It's speaking to something that is a unique experience, something that through its clarity can tell a story about something that only happened to you once, but is ultimately a humanistic concern. I think that's kind of when you really pick up on vulnerability in artwork.
Yeah, it's a kind of literary quality too, maybe, particularly when you think about it in terms of an occurrence happening, and it makes me think about the relationship between a writer and a reader, the intimacy of a book, but of course you can have that in a painting too. I definitely get that from your work, so do you feel like that's an objective of yours to create that sense of contact with a particular moment?
Yeah, it is, because my work is also very much rooted in narrative. So each painting, I imagine there's like a story behind it. I think that oftentimes the audience can sense that as well, like that there's a story, that the figures I often refer to as characters. So in making them, I think about, what are their desires, what are their fears. Even though that's not something that's articulated in the artwork, it's something that I'm pondering on when I'm fashioning them, so that they feel like real beings. That's something that's really important to me.
Okay, great. Firelei, let's bring you into the conversation, and actually that literary turn is very evident in the work we have here in making their mark, but maybe we can get on to that. Can I ask you to talk about the quality of publicness in your work and also the degree to which privacy is important to you as an artist?
So I guess in line with what Howardena was saying of that actual act of making, I remember some of just a need, an urge to make was the main kind of drive, and I did have an audience. I did have my sisters in mind, and as my practice grew, that expanded. What I felt a sense of self and other was not so rigid, and that just meant that if it was my room or a studio space I was able to get, I was making constantly. The first thing was the urge to make, and secondary, after things are made, then I would consider an audience, then I would consider who's going to be co-creating this with me and after seeing it. And what as you get mature and you have less jobs, because I'd have like 5 different jobs I'd have to commute to, or save a portfolio in someone's basement and it would get flooded, or the preserving of the thing wasn't paramount. It was more to express, to make, and luckily things are safer now and I can share the things I make with people. But yeah.
Can you say a little bit more, Firelei, about the idea of co-creation? I'm sure that caught everyone's ear. So you're saying that in the act of viewership, is it that the work is completed in that moment, or that it changes somehow in your mind?
So a work, to Shah's point of vulnerability, there are different ways of accessing that one. I'm not sure why there's so much echo. I also have to premise this by saying I am under such deadlines and I drink much what was happening internally within me. If everything that I just urgently needed to put onto the material, whether it's on paper or canvas, if that urgency reads and is viable and it gives you room to breathe and do, then that is vulnerability that works. Because there are, even in a political gesture, depending on the climate, that can be something that will have really high stakes. Very cerebral work, depending on the context, can become very vulnerable. So I don't think it's necessarily a matter of what binds it. It's a matter of that interaction with the viewer. And so when I meant that co-creation, is that there will be elements in my work that are not completely legible to someone. They will be opaque. I won't have, there's many things we share, but we won't be sharing exactly the same experience. So it's more that bridge, what I bring and what the viewer brings, that is actually creating what will be, what the work can function as.
Yeah, and it travels inside them. It becomes part of their interiority, doesn't it? Let's move on to a related topic which Shaba already mentioned, which is the question of scale. So, at first, of course, you might think of publicness in art as being associated with just bigness in art. This is why one reason why we chose the title Big Time for the talk. The big platform, the big occasion, the literally large-scale work. I was actually, I think, pleasantly surprised Howardena seeing the painting downstairs and how big it was and impressive, and it has this kind of power because of that. But then, as you said, Shaba, it's very interesting, and I think Simone Lee's Brickhouse is a great example of this. It's possible for something to be monumental, but also feel like it's encircling itself and that it's protecting some space within, and so that, exactly, so that it can feel almost like a place of safety, perhaps. And I wonder, Howardena, for you, as your career has developed, how have you negotiated scale, and how is that particular variable in art correlated to the other things you were trying to do?
I read my notes. Okay, in terms of scale, I work with both large and small work. The small works are handmade recently. Are handmade paper pieces that I've been doing with, some of you may know Dudonné in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I've been loving it there. They're such nice people. Located in Brooklyn Navy Yard. I also have made drawings using color. Sometimes it's drawing materials, watercolor, acrylic, whatever. And I would destroy the drawings by punching it in various size dots and would assemble them in a three-dimensional collage format. Some of the dots were glued along its bottom, so the dot would be standing up like that. And sometimes I would just glue it and hold it and wait. Anyway, I found out it was better to use, what is that, Play-Doh? So I would stand up and put Play-Doh on either side of the dot. Anyway, I sometimes use thread to pass over the dot to give it more dimension. My large-scale work involves spraying, at least currently now, dots with templates covering certain areas. It creates a geometrical matrix, okay? Others are, I have it right, yes. Others have a base of sewn canvas and cut and sewn in either strips. The piece here actually is the only piece of its kind, because this piece is woven. That's how I started, was with taking the strips of canvas and just weaving it like you would a basket, and it was really heavy. Anyway, so let's see, there are layers of paint, there are layers of dots, and then of course there's glitter, and with these, this piece outside, they're sequins. When I think about my work, I feel like I am, because people sometimes, if they see my shows, it's the same artist. Anyway, I feel like I'm a tree with many branches. That's my excuse. Let's see. My favorite artists who do small work, Paul Klee. I love the small pieces, and I was sort of spoiled working at the Modern because I could go down on the days when the public wasn't there and just kind of, carouse, very small works had a monumental feeling for me. The clay pieces were big, even though they were small. Punching dots is an intensive, repetitive process that actually kind of wrecked my shoulder, but it's back. That takes hours. Oh, I was just, having such a good time that I did too much. But anyway, even if you use a hole punch and punch many dots, hours are spent pulling them apart. Sometimes it can take a half a day just pulling them apart. Sewing is also intensive. I prefer the working large because of the outcome of the layering with the sprayed dots. I call that particular series tesseracts. And tesseract basically is fourth dimensional cubes, but I call it fourth dimensional geometry. And it has a very kind of cosmic kind of feel to it. It's very kind of strange. Anyway, so that's all I have to say in terms of scale.
Howardena, can I ask you a quick follow-up question? Because I was so struck downstairs with the impression that I was looking at a starry sky because of those little bits of glitter. And I'm wondering, well, I got lost in the work, and I'm sure many of you will have had that experience standing in front of Howardena's work. And I wonder whether you also get lost in it when you're making it. Do you lose track of time? Do you sort of enter another place?
I would say, I think I do. The difference now is I can have multiple projects going at once because I have 5 assistants. It's different when you're by yourself. Anyway, and I love doing each part of the process, but I work very slowly, just out of age and, just cranky knees, you name it. So I'm getting more done. Hard to explain. It's hard to explain. My favorite pieces now are the tesseract pieces because it creates. It makes us think of the Webb telescope. Just the way the circles sort of interact with each other, plus the geometric shape, which it's hard to explain. If I could take out my cell phone and show you, I would. But that's my favorite work now, working large, with small elements, and with geometry. Now, my father was a mathematician, so I was around all kinds of things, math, science, geometry. I even bought a microscope a while ago that sits in the studio looking at me. I haven't had a chance to play with it, but the pieces that I'm doing now almost remind me of what happens when you go from to micro, the small, from the very, very small. And I used to, when I was a child, I didn't get a toy. I got one pink bunny rabbit, but I was given a microscope as a child. And so I was used to looking at the drinking water in Philadelphia, which was alive.
Well, I suppose it's a kind of truism, and the famous film by Eames is Powers of Ten, that when you look at through a microscope and what you look at through a telescope kind of the same.
Yeah.
And so it's, I guess, a point about the relativity of scale too, the detail that you're capturing in those huge works. Firelei, can I move to you and ask you to talk a little bit about scale, relative or otherwise? How do you use that variable in your work?
So for me, scale is a way of immersing. Again, I really want, because there are certain subjects that might feel opaque, I want the viewer to be fully in, to be so immersed that by the time they start engaging with what might be different from them, they're already enmeshed. So I'm trying to build that enmeshment into the work. So the most minute thing can be if it can evoke a sublime, that's irrespective for either large or small. One of the things that I was most fascinated by as a student was looking at things like medieval manuscripts or Persian miniatures, and usually the marginalia, the things around the edges, are where the artist really got to be free. Usually the central figure was dictated by a certain history, by a certain tradition, so you couldn't, the excellence in that was in the exact repetition, but the artist could have frolicking and wildness all in the edges. And so I I remember when the Met was closed, I was volunteering, and their Islamic wing was, from September 11th to 2013 closed, but I was able to go and see them up close, which was amazing. And one of the things that are probably a conservator's nightmare are the things that drew me the most as an artist, like the way that the paper would warp and really respond to a viewer's presence. So things like foxing and cracking would be very much like the things that would happen to our own bodies. And I love that, and that's actually something that I did a residency with Dieudonné, and just trying to make that the central thing. I'm trying to, a lot of times, as a student, they would throw out different books, and in that act of deaccessioning, it kind of reveals what the institution no longer accepts or wants to be. So that in its own gave me an entry point. So I would take these book pages and make these very minute gestures, like very, a dancer furiously shaking to the point where their hair was like shedding all over the page, but it would be the size of a grain of rice. So you'd be drawn in closer, and for me, it wasn't so much the painted mark, was just to bring you closer so that you as a viewer, these would be shown unframed and floating on the wall. You would leave a bit of yourself. And over time, that same history that was perhaps wouldn't have allowed us to be, you and I can together break it further.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Firelei, because there's also a politics of scale in those works, isn't there? Because you're taking an existing substrate, so a map, let's say, or a manuscript page, and you're imposing another scale on it, which is your scale, I suppose, and then there's this scale of history, and there's a kind of dialogue that happens there, and it feels very charged.
They're usually shown also like in a larger configuration, so it's not about the individual page, it's about the relation and that atemporality. So you make, I get so self-conscious in these talks, so I apologize, but the thing about having that challenge scale and that space of intimacy is a lot of times these are spaces to really explore a moment in history, especially for me, points that seem like they're just so painful to witness. So, for instance, I was invited to do a work or to show work at the Berlin Biennale right around the time when Venezuela was completely collapsing, and just thinking, how did we get here? What were the parameters? And I could look at that moment specifically from within the archive, or like get a set of data points. And I think in doing that I would be blinded, where I would put the blinders of each pedagogy within that work. And I wanted to respond to it as a human being, as an emotional, intellectual, all my full experience self into a thing that would allow a viewer to come in at any point in the composition and connect different points in culture, history, and experience to really activate both the accepted canon and their memories of interacting with these spaces.
So that's so fascinating. It's almost like by having multiple scales active in the work, you're providing all this space that one can enter all these different registers, perhaps, through one way of thinking about it.
Also, just thinking of how we have, especially with social media, this almost artificial sense of intimacy.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the Persian miniatures were made for one hallowed viewer, one privileged viewer, the Shah, etc. And when we look at a YouTube video or we look at a reel, they're meant for us as individuals, but it's a collective making of that space, which is why when you bring a marginalia to the center, thinking of that flip, how are we actually creating and sometimes destroying, like what is that act?
Yeah. That seems like an ideal segue, Shaba, to your work and the question of scale, because obviously intimacy is very important in your work, but also powerful sense of scale in your work. Can you talk a little bit about how your own journey with questions of size and scale has been?
Yeah, so for me, scale has actually had a lot to do with the spaces in which I was making my work. So oftentimes been more like a formal aspect as opposed to a it's equally formal. It's an equal formal and conceptual concern. So sometimes there's been just constraints in terms of scale based on the location in which I was making work, and as I've moved into different workspaces, I haven't worked in so many different workspaces. I'm on my third serious workspace now, and it's a different scale, but I feel this desire now to kind of match the scale of the new space as well. But the one thing that has been consistent in terms of scale in my paintings has been actually the smaller marks. So because most of my paintings are constructed using the sewing machine, there's kind of a designated scale of the stitch that's consistent throughout all of the pieces. And that's a very small gesture. And because the works are these kind of collage, assemblage pieces with various like scrap materials that have been collected over a long period of time, there's lots of really kind of small miniature aspects of the paintings, regardless of how large the ultimate substrate might be. So I would say, because of some of the same reasons that Firelei mentioned, I like the idea of the final artwork being somewhat large so that the viewer can have this feeling of escapism, like when they're in front of the work, as if they can enter into it. I often too like for the figures in my works to be either human scale or slightly larger than human scale. I think psychologically makes the figures appear to be, mythological or something that was extraordinary, And for me, that's productive in terms of some of the goals I have and how I want the figures to communicate ideas of power or communicate ideas of a person that is what you can identify with, but also a person that is more than like the average human being. So even though oftentimes people would say that they find most of my paintings to be large, but a lot of the main kind of foundational aspects of the works are all very small. So they kind of again have this, they exist in kind of both realms of big, small, and large at the same time.
Yeah, obviously strong connection to Howardena's work and the paper cutouts, that unit that sort of determines the rest of the scale. I do have a follow-up question for you, but first, can I put in a seasonal request to somebody for a box of tissues? So we have some runny noses up here. So if anyone's got one, that would be awesome. Thank you so much. But Shaba, can I just also ask you about something that actually Amber Phillips talked about in her essay for Gagosian, which you sort of alluded to, which is what happens, thank you so much, which is what happens when a body in real space, the viewer's body, is with the body in the work. And she talks about, from her own perspectives, I think she self-describes as a black femme body, and seeing herself in relation to the body in the work is extremely meaningful for her. It's beautifully expressed how she writes about that. But I wonder about that, it's another kind of politics of scale, but sort of outside the work rather than inside the work, as we were talking about with Firelei.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love having these large black female bodies because for me, I think of the black female body as being like an original body, like the original body on Earth. So I think to have it be large speaks to like a shared human experience. Like it's like the original mother, like in the original vessel of humanity. So for it to be large, it speaks to the monumentality of that reality, but also to that body historically, but also in contemporary culture as well. And also to the largeness of my figures and also their like voluptuousness. Not so much in this work is not so much an example of that, but some of the other ones. It speaks to more of a history in Western painting where like a Rubenesque figure speaks to like plenitude, and it speaks to grandeur, and it speaks to someone or something that doesn't want for anything. So in that way, I feel like the figures are living this like aspirational life by being large and being like Rubenesque. So and taking up space. Thank you for
Yes, taking up space.
Yeah.
So scale is an action, effectively. Like scale is a verb or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So I want to move on to maybe a slightly more contentious area of the question of public and addressing to the public, which is which public are we talking about here? And I've already mentioned Simone Lee a couple of times, but in my essay for the book, I mentioned this Instagram post that I remember. It became kind of instantly famous at the time. So she was in the Whitney Biennial and had noticed that a lot of critics were remarkably obtuse in their reading of her work and didn't really seem to get it, and yet nonetheless felt qualified to comment. And so she wrote this amazing quotation, which I again quoted at greater length in the book if you're interested. But basically what she did was to list many of her own references, including Saidiya Hartman, David Potter, Leopold Senghor, the concept of negritude, critical fabulation, the Festac 77 Black Arts Festival. Probably already some of you are like, oh, I don't know what that is. You know, I have to go and research that. And so she creates this list. And then at the end she says, if you have no knowledge of these things, and if you casually use words like ethnic, exotic, and tribal, and you still think that they're useful words, then you lack the knowledge to recognize the radical gestures in my work. And that is why, instead of mentioning these things, I have politely said, Black women are my primary audience. So, cue much discussion on the internet, as you can imagine. So I have my own, deeply respectful view of that position that she takes, and I wrote a little bit about that in the book. But I wonder how each of you read that. Howardena, would you like to start? Yeah.
I want to reach out to men and women of color and those in the white audience who are open to a discussion that might threaten the loss of the boundaries of white supremacy. And also, I want to challenge the colonizer's language. I try to reach out to people of diverse culture, rather. One of the reasons why is I had my DNA done before COVID. I think it's changed since COVID. I found I was African, East Asian, that would be India, Delhi, and South India, European, Native American, Inuit, Alaska. How that happened, I have no idea. As well as, on my mother's side, Ashkenazi, 2 markers, Sephardim, 1 marker, and 1 Palestinian marker. Africa, South, East, West, and North. That would be places like Ethiopia, South Africa, Libya, and the Zulu Nation. With Europe, it was mainly Scandinavian, Finnish, Greek, Sicilian, Irish, and more. Well, anyway, I put my thoughts about this into paint. I was trained as a figurative painter. Boston U wouldn't talk to me after I went to Yale because they knew I'd be abstract. I can do both, and I can teach actually both, which is helpful. I also use text and installation. I refer to some of the crimes of colonialism, such as Columbus. Now this is pretty grim, I'm warning you. Columbus taught his dogs in Hispaniola, which apparently is current San Domingo. He taught his dogs to eat human flesh. The Taino, indigenous people, their infants, he would feed to the dogs. And the Taino, because there was gold there, if they didn't bring him enough gold, he would cut their hands off. Sort of like what happened in the Belgian Congo I can't remember what it was, the rubber trees, I think. He also enslaved them and shipped them off to Europe. A lot of people don't know about this. And of course, under the present threat of maybe Trump being president again, I'm sure everything will be censored and the libraries will have only 1 book on the shelf, his biography. Anyway, I want to reach to the diverse audience, and even though there are extreme reactions, pro and con, when my film about lynching, Rogue Fire Order, that was at the Shed, was shown in Oklahoma, it's in Tulsa. They borrowed it as part of their investigation into the Black Wall Street massacre. One of the people wrote in the guest book that it was trauma porn. And another person wrote in the book, the film should never be shown. That's my experience with audio.
So amazing sense of contrast there. Thank you, Howardena.
Sure.
I mean, the idea on the one hand of containing multitudes, as you evidently do, and then on the other hand having audiences that react that way to your work, which is so painful.
Oh yeah.
Tschabalala, can I ask you to take on this question?
Yes. The question is, who is our ideal audience?
Yeah, I guess the question is whether, for you, I hesitate to paraphrase only, so let me move it into a slightly different space, which is whether you think of your audience as being defined in any way, or is it sort of the audience is everyone? How do you manage your expectations around that? You were talking a little bit about it earlier, I realize, but given our fractious social fabric and the fabrics that you were creating and presenting to that context, how do you construe the audience that you're speaking to?
So when I'm making the work, I'm always making the work in my mind's eye for people who've had a similar lived experience to me. But I'm also aware that in reality, the work, once you make it and put it out into the world, that everyone is going to engage with the work. The other thing too about artwork is that I feel like the lifespan of artwork is so much longer than like a human life. So it is hard for me to say I want to make the work. I have an ideal audience. I would say my ideal audience is the same as Simone's life, because I feel like I want to make work with people who've had similar experiences as me, and I can also I feel like I can make the most impactful statement to individuals who've had similar experiences, because we have more in common, and some of the references in the work are just kind of instantly understood. But I think work can have two lives. I think anything that is symbolic has two lives. It has a kind of esoteric meaning for those who really understand it on a kind of a more, what is the word? They kind of understand it on a different level, and it has a meaning for the masses, right? If that makes any sense? So I think that you have to always keep that in mind. So for me, the masses are it's everyone, but then there's the esoteric meaning to my work that really is for people that have had experiences similar, that align with mine. But regardless of all that, there's another thought process that runs parallel to all those realities, and that is that the work can last for hundreds of years. There's artworks that we live with now that have lasted for hundreds of years. And a lot of these social markers that we're familiar with now, that simply did not exist in those time periods. Some of the identities that exist now did not exist in the time periods that some of the artworks that we engage with were first made. So I don't know what identities will exist in another 500 years. I don't know how Blackness will evolve in that time. But I'm making my work for posterity, and that's why I think honesty is so important. Just being earnest and it's putting kind of pouring yourself into your work, because those kind of humanistic concerns, as I mentioned earlier, are what's most consistent from generation to generation, nation to nation. Nations, fold, or new ones are built. I mean, time is such a crazy thing, and artwork can last for so long. So I think about what the work means now, what it could have meant in the past, and what it can mean in the future,
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Can I just ask you a quick follow-up on that? And you just said it, but I was thinking in some way, also perhaps you're making your work not only for a distant future and for the present, but you are also making it for the past. Like you are addressing the past through your work.
Well, I think about what the work could have meant in the past, and also the work is the work in my whole existence is entirely informed by the past. I would say even my identity, like I identify as like a Black American, that is a Black identity that is still relatively new, because I'm a descendant of American slavery. That's a phenomenon of modernity, of post-colonial era. So even that is something that you have to, contend with. That there are artworks that we look at today that are still older than the reality of my own identity. So I feel like that is something that people need to think about as well.
We're sitting with Howardena, who was navigating an early stage in that process in some regards, right? Just hearing about that. So, Firelei, would you like to take on this question of audience?
Yeah, so I mentioned before how in my baby studio I'd be thinking of like personal experience, the people I loved, how would that work speak to them? And then as the work kind of left those spaces, speaking then to, because at Cooper they taught us how every work that you made had to survive you by at least 100 years, keeping archivability like so present in your mind. It became almost like too tight a hold. I had to learn to, that was one of the gifts that Neri Ward gave me afterward. He said, you're giving archivists a job, just worry about, the concept of the work. So balancing between both of those, it left me with this understanding of, it has a very clear language. It'll have things that are going to resonate very strongly with people who have shared my experience. But ultimately, the thing that, like Shaba said, these are things that are going to live far beyond our geographies, our lived identities themselves. The thing that is most resonant to me, especially in the present, with how almost we're being taught to disassociate actively. Like a pleasurable state is a space of digital disassociation. So what I enjoy a lot about this exhibition in general is how much a lot of these works, you can enjoy them as a digital image, you can see a part of them, but to really fully experience them, you have to walk around them. You have to be present. It's made for your sight, for your height, for this architecture, for things that need to be experienced physically. So that is something that I really enjoy as an artist, being able to have something that grounds you, that gives you a space to breathe, that maybe gives you a place to, for a quick second, for a few minutes, stop that free disassociation. So, yeah.
That's beautiful, thank you. I'll just ask you one quick follow-up, Firelei. I was just thinking about Toshiko Takeyesu there, and this beautiful platform is behind me, and how she's been presented with Kei Sakamachi and Magdalena Dundo, and other artists that she would have, I think, well, she in some cases did respect deeply and was friends with, and in some other cases would have resonated with. And I'm just sad that she's not here to see it, in a way. And I wonder for you, is there a particular thing you would want to say about being in this show? Your work is shown in so many places now, but this is a very special place we're sitting in that Komal has created.
I mean, so the thing that I really appreciate about Komal is that she's actively thinking, there's many ways to be an activist. There's many ways to activate your power to carve out spaces in culture, but to also do that with this understanding of there is a canon you're interacting with. You can either lean into it, buy right into it, reinforce it, but you could also have the power to shift and to have whole new generations being formed very differently. And I very much appreciate that, and I see that, she puts herself on the line and will back her words. And there's many people, like Bob Branding also has a very strong, focused collection of vision. And I appreciate working with people who actually are willing to take those risks. Right when we came in, Shaba, she was telling us how there is this group of teachers from New York that all came in, who will all go back and teach their students about what is both beautiful, powerful, culturally significant moving forward. I remember as an elementary school student, those after-school programs were a lifeline. They were, my mom could not necessarily sign me up for programs or take time to be with me, but she gave me the freedom to basically, if I had the way, if I could take myself there and I could figure out how to fund it, I could do any cultural thing possible. And so they became a space of survival. So to think that that space of survival will very clearly have a note of these works by women are the canon, is of note. That is something that you can't just take for granted, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, amen. Just one last thing before we turn it over to questions. I think it would be criminal if I did not give Howardena the last word. And, okay, guys. So I did have one other question, which I'm just going to pose to Howardena, which is about memory.
Memory, I'll have a very bad memory.
And particularly the question is about the memory work done by your art and what your work has to do with that.
Okay, I'll try. I've been using cut canvas and sewing canvas since the mid-1970s. The work was all about process and layering. I use acrylic because I am allergic to oil. Plus, my process was not possible with oil. It needs to dry fast, and it must be flexible. The Shedd exhibition had both painting and the film. The film was intense with the layering of overwhelming images of sadistic cruelty, the sadistic cruelty of lynching, which referenced both the civil rights movement and slavery. The paintings included in an element of cut foam, as if it was like a kind of relief, the branch and the trees and all. And I cut and sealed the foam with thinking about archival stuff, with jade glue. Concerning memory, as you can see, I can barely remember things. The film was about what a segment of the population can do and not remember, and are hostile that they are being faced with the facts. The brutal violence of lynching, and at the time it was turned into a gruesome theater where you were invited to come to the lynching and hundreds showed up. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Howardena.
Quick shout out, speaking of that memory, the things that our bodies remember but that collectively we actively work to forget. There is this wonderful film by Ava DuVernay called Origin that I highly, highly recommend, and it's based on that book, Caste, The Origins of American Discontent, and to re-embody, to remember our full selves. I recommend seeing it.
It's what keeps us going in our work to expand canon, to make it a much more egalitarian canon. Expanding on what Firelei was talking about, today we had about 50 to 60 teachers from the New York City Department of Education, all the visual arts teachers, high school, middle school, and elementary school, spend the morning with us. And to see these teachers looking at every artwork for a few minutes, to be enthralled, and then to be also brimming with ideas on how they were going to take these back to their students and what specific projects they were going to do, was really one of the highlights, the biggest highlights of my 3 months with this exhibition. And I will also propose proposal to you that if you have any teachers or if there are any other groups that you would suggest visiting the show, we'd be very, very happy to host. Our objective here merely is to spread the word and to show how excellence and equity are not exclusive. And so anything we can do and any way you can help us spread the word would be greatly appreciated. Over to questions.
Thank you so much, Kamal. So, are there questions for our artist panel? Yes.
Thank you. Hello. My question is in regards to when you feel most at ease when creating in your studio, and how do you create a seamless atmosphere for that mode of flow during that stage? Space is super important. It doesn't matter if it's like my small bedroom in the Bronx or my 5,000 square foot studio, or like wherever I go, whatever space at every stage, it needed to feel like the energy was right and welcoming. So sometimes it might have meant the arrangement of things around, having that wall be very clear. Sometimes this incense I would burn, or the smell of the space, it would all be things that would ground me. The light, the smell, the space, to then enter that. I wish I was the type of person who was like, chaos, yes, make. I need to reset, make it blank, and then go in. I'm never afraid of a blank canvas. The blank canvas is always like fountain of inspiration, but bad energy, nothing works.
Well, I would have to say that I kind of have like a baseline. I'm kind of a high-strung person, so kind of have like a baseline, generally of anxiety, to be honest. So I rarely have like a clear mental state, like perfectly crystal clear. But I just learned to just go in and work regardless. And honestly, the work itself is cathartic. So I'll usually go into the studio in whichever state I'm in, and then just through the working, I'll arrive at a peaceful place. But that always comes through the working. Rarely on the onset of the day.
Or is there anything you
Well,
need to do to work?
I'm used to being around bad energy. It's just, I mean, being often the only person of color, and one of the things that I found happen, that people would carry kind of small grudges. One, because I worked at the Modern, and the impression was I would fling open the doors. I started off as an exhibition assistant, so I had kind of the hostility within some of the feminist art community against me because I wasn't bringing the curators from the Modern to air. I mean, there are all sorts of things. Like West Beth, I didn't have a studio on my own. I shared it. And we hardly spoke to each other. It was a white guy. He was okay, it was just, we never talked. And so far, the best space, I loved my space on 7th Avenue, but it was really kind of spooky because of the alarms going off. And then my next door neighbor was an ex-Hitler youth who was in fashion. So it wasn't like I did knock on the door and say, "Can we talk?" No. So I would say the most positive space is where I am now, and that's where Garth Brennan and you got me about 2,300 square feet. I have 4 assistants there and 1 at home who can take care of both, punching dots for soul and, like grocery shopping and whatever. I mean, I am spoiled rotten. And my father died in 98, so maybe I'll have more time. Anyhow, yeah, I'm used to negative space. I'm used to it. But now I have positive space. I have to get adjusted.
I think I can speak for everyone when I say I'm very happy that you're spoiled rotten. It's very good. Other questions for our artists? Yes. in the back there. Just hold on 1 second for the microphone so everyone can hear, including us. Thank you.
Hi, Andrea Ramirez. Thank you for this. I love the idea of co-creating and evolution with artwork. Could you speak to maybe a piece of work that has changed you after you've created it and seen it co-create with the viewer? And it could be any one of you.
I think the work that changed me, because I did it when I was in transition. I had left the modern on my own. I wasn't fired, which is amazing. And I started teaching, and Donald Cuspitz, you know, the art historian, he was the chairman of the department. He was driving, and we were in a very bad car accident, where I ended up as a passenger in the back seat, and I had a concussion. That's part of my memory problem. And it's kind of screwed up my hips and all, but I haven't had, thank God, a problem with that. I've already forgotten what I was going to say.
So the artwork that changed you.
Free White in 21. That was after I left the modern, when I started teaching. It was that summer of 1980. And I was kind of bursting. I think part of it was I had restrained myself when I was at the modern doing anything that was issue related. And after the accident, I felt I wanted to speak out about how I feel and what my point of view is, because I might end up in another accident and be dead. So that started my creating Free White in 21, where I used my mother, because of the modern, would always send me clothes, and I always hated the clothes. But the modern salary was pretty bad. I mean, when I first started there, the starting salary was $5,000 a year, and in the second year you got a $5 raise, and you would get a Christmas card from the Rockefellers. You know, whatever. Whatever. I forgot that.
Well, so how did Free White in 21 change you as an
That
artist?
changed my life, partly because it was like I fractured myself into a kind of, I don't know a white woman who would look quite like that. You know, I had stage makeup, I had a blonde wig, I had sunglasses from my youth, and I was in this dialogue with myself. And some of the things that happened to me, like and I still think about it. It's like in years, in kindergarten, one of my kindergarten teachers, when it was time to go to the bathroom, she said, okay, I was the only black kid probably, or maybe there was another one. And she said, when you have to go to the bathroom, you raise your hand. So I raised my hand, and she became infuriated. This was during segregation in Jim Crow in Philadelphia. She did not want me to use the bathroom the white students used. So she tied me to the bed. And I remember lying there thinking, I am not going to pee on myself. Anyway, so for me, it worked to express some of the things that had happened to me. And then people saw it who had things happen to them, so that they wouldn't feel so isolated, that they weren't the only ones. And it moves people who are also non-black, because they don't realize how these things that seem maybe small from a distance, they aren't. They stay with you, the trauma, for the rest of your life. Unless you get a really good therapist. And they're hard to find. Put it that way.
It's an artwork that changes many lives, not just absolutely.
Many lives, and it's being shown in Berlin now, all places. It was shown in the Modern, the show that I heard about that was on. And I'm very, touched that people are still moved by it. Yeah.
Tschabalala or Firelei, would you like to hazard a work that's changed you after you've made it?
I have a public sculpture that I had on view at the Delaware Pavilion in the UK. It was on a small town called Bexhill-on-Sea. And the sculpture was actually first shown in London. Then it was brought to the Delaware. And then maybe after about a month of it being there, it was vandalized. So it's a sculpture of I'll tell you exactly, it's a great story. But it was a woman, it's a bronze, a large, 3-meter tall bronze, a black woman sitting on a chair. And the sculpture was part of a series, looking at domestic space and thinking about what does it mean to be at leisure, what does it mean for a black body to be at leisure. But have a black body seated, especially in public, is different than within an interior space. So the sculpture was vandalized by someone who like spray painted just the entirety of the figure's skin white with spray paint. And the museum, and the museum like called me and I had a Zoom call and they told me what happened, and they actually had like a giant tarp over the sculpture and they had everything like barricaded. And I said that, oh yeah, they wanted to stage a protest in front of the sculpture still covered in a tarp to be like an anti-racist protest or something like that. And I told them that I think that they should take the tarp off of the sculpture for one, because I think having the sculpture be covered in a tarp was really frightening. And I think that people would actually think maybe something else had happened to it that could be even more offensive than it being spray painted in white. Like maybe someone would have thought like a slur could have been put on it or something like that, which wasn't the case actually. It's actually strange because the fact that they just painted it white was almost to say, like, something formally like wrong with the sculpture, just wanted her to be white instead of being black or something. But I asked them to remove the tarp, and that instead of doing a protest, which I thought people would come, be angry, leave angry, nothing would be resolved, that they do a community cleanup. So they thought, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Also, it would, help get the sculpture back to where it needed to be before the, restorators came. So they organized this, and to my surprise, I thought maybe like 10 people were gonna show up. Like 300 people showed up to restore the sculpture. Yeah, so like so many hundreds and hundreds of people from the community and around the community came. And by the end of the day, like all of the paint was removed, and just by the community cleanup. And then when the restorators came, they just restored the patina, and it was brand new essentially. And the sculpture's been there. Actually, the residency of the sculpture has been extended since this incident. And it changed me because I was actually surprised. Well, it validated two things for me actually. Like it validated my belief that something positive can come out of a negative experience, which is something I've always believed. But also too that people want to be able to take action in moments like this. So it's not enough to just voice your grievance or your concern, but people like to be able to take tangible action. And that's why art is important, because it's something that's tangible, something that's physical. It's a physicality to art, and there's something powerful in things that you can touch. And the fact that people could touch the object that was a point of trauma and actively remove that gesture, which was a violent gesture, I think was really healing for that community.
Please.
I just remembered it. It was in my traveling show. It traveled around in the early 1992, 95, whatever. And it was shown in a show, I can't remember whether it was in Cincinnati or Cleveland. There's an art school there. And the first day of the show, someone stole it from the show. And then it was an art school where they argued over whether I should have had the show. And then the young man, he was a white photographer, was the curator for the gallery. They threatened him, and they stole all of his camera equipment. And then I started getting harassing calls from students on my home phone. So this was like 1994. Yeah, so the reaction to the film was basically to obliterate it, to get rid of it. But fortunately, it wasn't one of mine. So yeah, there are duplicates of it. But anyway, yeah, so those experiences, yeah, I know. Now I only answered my cell, I did not pick up my home phone.
Now people, I think there's a whole generation that's in solidarity with that not wanting to pick up the phone because texting is clutch in that hand. You're just like, don't even have to. People are terrified of answering the phone because there's a general trauma around voice calls. So for me, the things that changed, the work that changed me, where I first noticed it significantly was this one abstract painting of a wave. And it's odd to even have that as a work. But I remember in undergraduate school, institutions in my mind usually end up having the force and vigor of the canon 10 years behind. There's always a lag between what is considered good and popular, or avant-garde in what is an institution versus what's outside. And so I had a very strong push in my time in undergrad to make formal abstraction, because they were going through the backlash a bit of something like the 1992 Whitney Biennial. Identity was something that was almost too tender to touch, and if you brought something in, it would have a lot of pushback. It would mean getting destroyed at a Cooper crit. If you brought anything that had anything that was too specific or too pointed, I remember I did this one piece where I drew the map of Hispaniola. That same island you were talking with, Saint Domingue. First contact, Columbus, horrid, tangible things done to peoples, both from every continent passing through. It is one of the beauties of being a Caribbean is that you have every single continent within your DNA. It is where new economies were tested, where new populations were made. Whole new models, modernity was founded in that space. I come from a place of deep avant-garde that is always seen as a place of pleasure and disregard. You think of the Caribbean and you think of a vacation. But I wanted to have that as a point of discussion in the class. You know, we're New Yorkers, we're urbanites, etc. I came from Miami, by the way. So I thought, if I can't teach you this history, the horrors of literal cannibalizing, burning of protests, etc., all the concrete points of history, I could have you embody it by dancing. You could have the steps of compa on one side, the dance of Haiti, or bachata on the other side. You, as a person, could go ahead and experience it by seeing the similarities and the differences in between. That was absolutely destroyed. Why are we doing this? Why is this? Like, blah, 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 blah. No full pressure to not engage, because it was hard to engage. People, when there's a challenge, unless it takes time to pioneer that space. So I mastered abstraction. I became very good at doing the things that abstraction could give. But after undergraduate school, I remember thinking, I still don't know how to have full specificity in this work. To be able to have my sisters come into this space and say, I belong, I see myself fully in it. So I went and I started doing these very rigorously rendered, tight drawings of women and transitioning to natural hair. I remember at that point there were a lot of forums for how to transition from all the different lassitudes of hair, of transformation, to go into a natural state, questioning what is natural. That felt like the first point where I could actually speak clearly to the specific audience I wanted. So that meant that there was a long period of full figuration, like the work you see in the room in the back. There's a history of intense portraiture. Portraiture is one way of holding yourself in the common mindset. You'll have a portrait of Henry Christophe, the first king of Haiti, painted by the same painter who painted Napoleon, for instance. But his wife, his daughters, never documented. People who formed letter presses, had printing presses in the palace, who were very much about reintroducing identification, that's erased from the documents. There are just, if you look up First Kingdom of Haiti, what you'll find is a document about the oppressive, violent regime of this one gentleman, and nothing about the contributions of his wife, his daughters, etc. So I wanted to have a space through figuration to mark them and to bring them in. I felt like the only way to have that level of specificity, that way of speaking directly to those I love and to bring the people I love into a centered space was through figuration. So when I did this wave, which was over a diagram of a hospital in Louisiana, Marine Hospital, I felt like I had all the symbolic language with me able to say what I needed to say in a space of abstraction. I was able to merge both what I had, the rigor of what I had to go through in undergraduate school, and all the spaces of convening that had been after. So it was a node to Yemoya, this space of renewal and regeneration. That Marine Hospital had been a central site for, if you know anything about medicine and the Black body and the Black experience within the American South, there's a contentious history with both. So to bring a space of evolution that could be seen as a space of evolution seemed like a wonderful new doorway. And installing that work, I've seen it installed in different spaces. And when you have someone write to you saying, like, I see her, I see this space, or I stand in front of it and I cry, is something that I could not dictate. But for it to have a full valence outside of me without me having to be like didactic it seemed like a gift.
Amazing, thank you. I really hate to draw this conversation to an end, but I think that image of each work in the show as a door that we can enter is a very apt one to conclude with. I just want to give everyone a chance to come and say hi to our artists. So let me say what a pleasure and honor it's been to be part of this amazing conversation, and I'll just hand back to Kamal for a few last words.